We are now in the public session of the Board of Internal Economy meeting. We will go to the next item, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they approved? Mr. Strahl.
Just briefly, I note there is a mention of pairing. There was a mention of we didn't wish to talk about pairing. I should actually read from the minutes. I'm going by memory here. I just want to make it clear that I think that was an informal discussion. I did not wish to indicate with my remarks certainly that any changes to the pairing system should be made. I just wanted. I don't know if that's indicated in the minutes there. I just wanted to clarify that I was not asking for this board or PROC or anyone else to study the issue of pairing now or in the future. I think that would be a discussion between the whips, perhaps.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Okay, with that information, or
it's a non-change.
With that presentation, I guess, can we say the minutes are approved then? Agreed. Thank you very much. The next item is business arising from the previous meeting. Anything arising from the previous meeting? No, thank you. And then we're on to number 7, the update from the members' working group on the LTVP. We have quite a group here to present on that. Is it Ms. Sgro who will lead off?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I will. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And so today I'm joined by my colleague Kelly Block and Peter Julian, who's also a representative on this working group. So for your background information, the working group met on June 4th and June 11th to review the proposed governance structure and initiate engagement on the Centre Block Rehabilitation Project. The House of Commons administration provided an overview of the LTVP and background on consultations and approvals to date. The mandate of the working group discussed the governance structure and agreed on the mandate. The working group was formed as requested by the BOIE with a view to provide engagement with members on requirements and oversight on the CB project and the LTVP. The working group will report to the board to provide updates on the rehabilitation project and make recommendations as required. The working group will help guide and inform consultations and engagement with members and stakeholders. The guiding principles that we will work under are over the development and implementation of the LTVP guiding principles were developed at various milestones. We review those established principles and propose an updated set of guiding principles that are appropriate for Parliament with regard to the Centre Block rehabilitation. We would like to seek voice endorsement for the following principles. The proposed principles are: Centre Block's primary purpose is to accommodate the two houses of Parliament. It is first and foremost a workplace for parliamentarians, and the design and operational requirements of the building must take those needs into consideration. The Centre Block rehabilitation.
Strahl, you had a.
Do we
have this?
I don't have this in front of me. I trust what Mrs. Sgro is saying is correct, but I don't see it. I just would like to read it at the same time, perhaps.
Do we have the same presentation available for members, or
what I have here is our speaking notes is what I have.
Well, here it comes. At least one of them.
Mr. Wright.
Mr. Strahl, you're the lucky one. You get the help.
My understanding was that you had received a fair amount of information on this project already.
But we have something, but it doesn't have the list that you were starting, and it sounded like a good list for us to have.
The guiding principles?
The guiding principles, yes. But I think we better let you carry on.
Yes. The CB Rehabilitation Project will aim to enhance the operations of Parliament from a functional and technological standpoint to ensure that the infrastructure continues to meet evolving requirements for the proper functioning of Parliament. The CB Rehabilitation Project will work to ensure public participation in the work of Parliament with continued access to chamber proceedings, question period, and committee work, as well as to enhance and expand opportunities for public outreach by creating spaces that complement the historic building. The CB Rehabilitation Project will explore options for universal accessibility and interconnectivity between buildings on the parliamentary campus via an underground tunnel system and supporting infrastructure. The CB Rehabilitation Project will continue to create a balance of accessibility to Parliament and a secure environment. The CB Rehabilitation Project will strive to restore the significant heritage fabric of the building as originally designed and built, and to update all engineering and life-saving systems to comply with contemporary expectations of wellness, safety, sustainability, and universal accessibility in support of parliamentary functions. Decisions regarding the future of Centre Block will be guided by the principles of fiscal responsibility and a conscientious use of resources while taking into account the value placed on restoring historical heritage spaces. At our working group's initial meeting, we were provided with an overview of the project plan and the roles of the various stakeholders. This complex project is being delivered following a fast-track methodology consisting of many overlapping activities where early decisions need to be made while requirements are still being developed. This risk is managed through a process of layered decisions that allow flexibility. So going forward, we will be looking at detailed requirements for key functions in Centre Block and the Visitor Welcome Centre complex to ensure that building functions reflect the operations of Parliament and the members' needs in our workplace. In terms of immediate activities for Centre Block and the Visitors Welcome Centre, it has been determined that there are 2 items that require endorsement at this time. The excavation contract strategy for the Visitors Welcome Centre and the construction hoarding. The working group has reviewed the options and brings forward our suggestions for the BOIE's consideration. The Visitor Welcome Centre requirement was established in 99 document Building the Future. The concept was established and approved by BOIE, COIE, and Cabinet in 2006, reconfirmed in 2009 and 2011. Requirements for the VWCC Phase 2 are still under development and will require the working group's validation and further BOI approval. To ensure that the CB project maintains momentum, an early decision on the excavation contract strategy is required. The working group was presented with 3 options for the excavation strategy for the proposed Visitor Welcome Centre Phase 2. All options considered the following implications: security, visitor experience, parliamentary functional requirements, and cost. While it was clear to us that excavation is required to accommodate base building requirements, we were of the view that other expressed requirements should also be assessed and decided upon post-election. Accordingly, the working group recommends going forward with the excavation contracting strategy for Phase 2 of the Visitor Welcome Centre that includes the baseline of a 22,000 metre net underground expansion of Centre Block, with options that allow for the contract to be scaled down or up, depending on decisions with respect to allow actual requirements beyond machinery and equipment. Second was the construction hoarding. This site plan indicates roughly the maximum area for the construction site, which includes the Centre Block, the anticipated approximation of where the VWCC will require excavation, room for construction trailers, material laydown, and heavy equipment mobility. The black line indicates the approximate location proposed for the construction hoarding, leaving approximately half the front lawn for public access and for activities to continue through the project implementation. The construction hoarding is planned to start installation in the fall of 2019. The working group was presented with 3 hoarding options for consideration. The working group recommendation is a hoarding design that reflects the architecture of Centre Block, displaying images and interpretative text about the project and Parliament for visitors, maintained over the lifespan of the rehabilitation project. This option provides a cost-effective financing for the construction site and a visitor experience while the Centre Block is rehabilitated. So the recommendations there before you today from our working group are to proceed with the excavation contracting strategy for Phase 2 of the Visitor Welcome Center. That includes the baseline of 22,000 meters net underground expansion of center block, with options that allow for the contract to be scalable down or up depending on decision with respect to actual requirements, and to proceed with hoarding on the front lawn with large monochromatic photos or illustrative drawings on the front face with ornamental black fence for the parameter of the remainder. And of course, joining Ms. Block and I at the table here today are a variety of the appropriate people from the various departments that are working on this. Ms. Block, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that?
No, just that if there are any questions, I think we'd be happy to answer them.
Mr. Strahl?
Yeah, I guess this is going to be a bit of a, I think, work in progress as we figure out where we don't want to duplicate your work. You've obviously been assigned to these tasks to represent all of our interests. Maybe if you could explain to me, obviously decisions were made previously regarding the new Visitors Welcome Center, and I wasn't a part of those boards and perhaps haven't seen those documents. So just look, I don't know if we can go back to the site plan there we are. So I don't know how to scale that is. I imagine it's not designed to be that way. Could you perhaps explain, just for my benefit, the current visitor and parliamentary business entrance obviously only deals with the house side at this time. However, it looks like that is, what is the current footprint of the temporary, if we want to call it that, visitor welcome center? And what's the, is that simply the same, what additional functions is it performing to be 22,000 square meters up or down in size? It seems to me, I guess I should have been paying more attention that this was a temporary structure downstairs here, but that looks quite a lot larger than what we have now. And I'm just maybe explain to me very quickly what is there more under there than just the Welcome Center, and it's just what it's being called, or do we really need something that's 10 times bigger than what we have now?
Thanks very much for the question. So phase one, and it is phase one and phase two. So phase one is approximately 5,000 square meters. So about a quarter of the size of what is recommended to proceed with today. And that really services West Block as a visitor welcome center. It is a permanent facility, not a temporary facility. Phase one, which will be extended with phase two, which will serve, in addition to West Block, the center block, as well as the East Block, creating, in essence, one integrated parliamentary complex with this visitor welcome center beneath the Great Lawn. So the visitor welcome center phase two would provide the same services that phase one does, which is security screening first and foremost, some visitor services and support functions for the operations of the house. The Visitor Welcome Center would provide those services for the center block and the East Block, as well as some expanded visitor experience for individuals visiting the Hill. At this point, prior to the center block being emptied, and the Library of Parliament tracks these statistics. 75% of people trying to visit the center block were not able to because of volume, essentially management. So Visitor Welcome Center would provide expanded facilities for Canadians and international visitors visiting the Hill to be able to have an experience with our Parliament. The security functions are a core requirement of this facility, as well as one of the things that I think we've reported to a number of committees now, modernizing the center block will mean a displacement of about 2,500 square meters of space within the facility. If you look at the West Block, the modernization of the West Block, just as an example, there was a 14-fold increase in the space required for mechanical operation of the building. So putting new elevator shafts, for example, additional washrooms, it takes space from the facility, as well as all the mechanical shafts. As you would know better than I, the center block does not have a lot of those modern functionality. So the last piece I would indicate is that there's also the opportunity that the Visitor Welcome Center could absorb some of those displaced functions from the center block. So some of the core support functions for the Visitor Welcome Center. But with this strategy that's being proposed, those decisions don't need to be taken today. This is an excavation strategy that can be brought down or up, depending on the requirements of Parliament as we proceed.
If I may add, the discussion at the working group right now is what Rob has been mentioning thus far has been kind of the proposed visitor welcome center in the past, but the working group asked a very good question in terms of, do we really need all those function and build a visitor welcome center as it's entertained? Right now, what is before the subcommittee, the working group, is I will call it a wish list in terms of requirements. These requirements needs to be assessed and validated, and that was the discussion in terms of the working group. What has been clear for the working group is, for example, machinery and equipment that needs to modernize the center block, which represent, I believe, about 10,000 square meters. And also connectivity between the building, let's say in terms of the handling of goods and all the material handling. But the working group said to keep the momentum and to allow the digging for at least those basic requirements needed for the modernization of the center block to proceed and not lose the momentum over the project. And post-election, the working group will turn its head around the different requirement expressed by the partners, and also taking into the view how can the Visitor Welcome Center Phase 1 can be repurposed, which is left for a post-election review.
Julian.
Merci Madame Squirrel et Madame Bloch pour la présentation.
Thank you very much for this presentation.
What is coming before the boy right now? We're not approving the visitor center, and I don't think there is even consensus around moving to a visitor center, but the excavation contract is something that we're proposing be tendered for now to begin in January 20th. Now, if we're looking at a ballpark of the 22,000 square meters, that allows the ability of the boy after the election either to scale up if ultimately the decision is a visitor center, and I think there'll be a time and place to discuss and debate that, or to scale down to the minimum requirements, which, as Monsieur Patrice and Monsieur Wright have indicated, are part of the essential elements of just supplying the mechanical updates to the center block, and that would be 12,500 square meters. So the scalability, I think to all three of us in our minds, is very important, that the decision not be taken around the visitor center now, but the excavation contract allows to scale down just to the essentials, or ultimately if a future boy decides to go with the visitor center, to scale up to the ultimate size, which would be about 33,000 square meters. So the excavation contract does not lock us in, and is not a decision to move ahead with the visitor center. It is not. And I feel pretty strongly about that. That's not a decision that we should be making just a few weeks prior to a general election. But the boy coming out of the election and the committee coming out of the election can then decide, have that debate and discussion, and decide whether that ultimately that excavation contract is scaled down to the essentials, 12,500 square meters, or scaled up to another concept. And I'm comfortable with recommending the excavation contract and moving ahead with that, with the caveat that the boy can decide that we just keep to the essentials in the new year.
list, before I go to Ms. Block, this is listed on the agenda as an update. I wanted to ask to what degree you're looking for a decision from the board. But Ms. Block had her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your question, and it probably raises for me other questions I have about our role as a working group. I don't think it's for us to determine or suggest, what decisions this board needs to take on this. But I just wanted to concur with what my colleague has presented to you in regards to the things that we deliberated, and would just add to it that the option that we are favoring at this point in time is the second of three. So there was an option to go with a smaller square footage and also a larger. So we took the middle of the road approach on this one, knowing that there was the scalability that my colleague commented on. I would also, just from my own personal perspective, get on the record that I leaned heavily in supporting the recommendation coming forward on what had been done by previous boards in regards to establishing this concept of a welcome center, a visitor welcome center. So I did not feel, as a member of a working group that's here to provide some sort of suggestions to others who are the decision-making bodies, that I would be willing to undo what work had been done over the previous 20 years.
Thank you. Monsieur Julian and then Ms. Bergen. Monsieur Rodriguez, you would be Rodriguez. Okay. Don't be confused about that.
Oh,
Excusez-moi.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's mentioned here that there's about half of the lawn that remains for public activities. So it seems with the Canada Day celebrations coming, it probably will be the last one for a while because it takes a lot of space, and you're all invited. But when you say that we can still hold activities in the remaining space, how many people can participate? What is the size of the space? And that's my first question. I'll ask my colleague. But first of all, we're working closely with our partners, with Heritage Canada, in order to make sure that all possible activities can continue. This is a key objective of our work. It's the basis of our partnership model.
Further detail, there has been a significant amount of effort to coordinate across both legislative and executive branches of government to make sure it's as much as possible a very positive visitor experience and business as usual. To give you a couple of examples, we've been coordinating with the Department of National Defense, and they have confirmed that the changing of the guard, for example, will continue on the Hill. We have coordinated with our construction manager to make sure, to the extent we can, the flag will continue to fly over the Peace Tower, even with a view of continuing yoga on the Hill. So every ceremony that we are aware of, every possible activity has been fully coordinated, and we have a summary of the current plans with regard to what is going to be happening with those events. But I would say, in general, nothing has been unduly affected. It's able to operate within the smaller footprint of the front lawn.
And I guess we can have that list of the plans.
We'd be happy to provide that.
Thank you. Ma deuxième question, c'est la
My second question, when we talk about the construction hoarding, and this seems very aesthetically pleasing, did you consult with Tourism Ottawa or the Mayor of Ottawa? This has an important impact on the visual aspect of the site.
Closely with the National Capital Commission, the City of Ottawa, Ottawa Tourism, to ensure that that the visitor experience remains front and center. and as well with the parliamentary partners to ensure that the dignity of Parliament is adhered to as we move through that, and that we remain cost conscious. So we're trying to kind of find the balance of all of those elements as we move forward, and to make sure that we have a consensus. And I would say that that on this element, I think we've probably achieved that consensus approach to make sure that we have a balance. And one critical thing that is perhaps, bears mentioning, different than the West Block, where we had the traditional wrought iron fencing. The construction yard was a bit off to the side, so not as visible as this will be right in the front of the Grand Lawn. So covering that is probably a little more important because it's a center block, but because it's the Great Lawn as well, so probably a little more important.
So you're saying that most stakeholders or people that are concerned, like the mayor and others, would be comfortable with one of the concepts? Okay. Thank you. Merci.
Ms. Bergen.
I apologize, I was a little bit late for this this part of the meeting. Two things. As I recall, when the notion and the idea came up, and I think I brought it forward as an idea that we get representatives from each of the parties to reflect ideas and thoughts back to the building committee, or however it would be termed. It was in the context of the West Block renovations. Many MPs felt that, to use, for lack of a better example, they felt that a house was built for them that they were going to be living in and using, but nobody ever asked them what they wanted in the house. And so in order to avoid that with the center block renovations, we wanted a mechanism that was not overly bureaucratic, that wasn't going to be dragging or slowing down things, but whereby our members could speak to that representative in their caucus, whether it was, boy, we need to have more women's washrooms, or we need to have a place where the media can't get to us when we're walking into the chamber, or some of the other things that we've heard about, whereby those thoughts, ideas, wish lists could be conveyed. Not in anticipation that they would all be given, but there would be at least a mechanism for that to be communicated. But what I don't believe this was to be is a place where three colleagues are now asked to be making some pretty major decisions. If that's changed, I think we then need to know how that's going to work. And I know when we approached Ms. Block, for example, we did not convey to her that this was now going to be the requirement. So I think we need some clarification on the role of our colleagues who are part of this group. But second to that, then I would be interested to know how some of the decisions like this are made, because they are major, major decisions. Some of the ideas around what might or might not happen on the front lawn, I'm not, I don't know if we know who's making the decisions, thus who's accountable for those decisions. So I think those are two things I'd like us to solidify. The role of this group and the role of Ms. Sgro, Ms. Block, and I believe Mr. Julian, you're on that as well, which I do not think should be making major decisions, but then where those decisions are made.
Role precisely. I think you've stated it accurately and exactly in terms of what was intended to be. I see Mr. Patrice, and I don't know if Mr. Wright wants to comment as well on this, to give, as you said, what the perspective is on this from the administration and from PSPC.
I'll provide my perspective on this. Traditionally, the decision in relation to the requirements and the LTVP and the development of the center block and the change and so on were all approved by BOI. It's a BOI approval that sets the requirements for the house. And my reflection in terms of the past experience is that these are important decisions, these are complex projects, and often, on my reflection, the time spent in terms of reviewing the decision and the impact, I don't think you did justice in terms of your responsibility. Obviously, and it was a lesson learned, frankly, from the West Block, the project, and as you entertain At the beginning, that was to provide a conduit for members could receive the, as you explained, receive the feedback from the various caucus to make sure that your voice and your concern are expressed. As you know, in recent times, another committee, for example, has took a particular interest in terms of certain decisions that had been made and also decision for the future. Some members has raised some preoccupation in terms of the need and so on. So for me, it also reflected a lack of sense of engagement from the members. And I believe that this group was a well placed to receive the detailed information, not to make decision, but at least to challenge and ask the tough question to the administration and our partners, Public Works, in terms, do we really need that? And it's not administration, to be blunt, driven requirements, but it be members' requirements. And then with a view that the working group could also meet with PROC, for example, if they have an interest and it's a members-to-members discussion in terms of their view and their perception of what the project would be, but also to provide a more sense of engagement and involvement of members in the project. So that's, and I think Mr. Stwall said it, it's a new beast, frankly, and it's going to evolve and it's going to adapt based on your instruction, based on the needs of the members and the House, and also in terms of the observation of the working group. And we're there to assist.
So it's a way to ensure that members are involved in being consulted as the process goes forward and as the construction proceeds, right? But do I read you correctly as suggesting that the board itself ought to be, are you suggesting the board should be inserting itself by giving its, I don't know if the word I want is decision or its own input on certain aspects of this?
Certainly, because at the end of the day, it's the board who approves. And at the end of the day, to be blunt, it's the board who could be accountable for the decisions that are made in terms of the requirements stated by the House of Commons.
I see. So in terms of we're the ones that state what the requirements of the House of Commons. We are the ones that state the requirements of the House of Commons.
That's right.
Right. But okay, compare that to what the role of PSPC is and the executive.
Yeah.
So, from our perspective, and managing on behalf of Parliament these very large projects, one of the most significant risks and one of the most important elements is having, clear decisions that are sustainable. And that's probably the most important element for us. And so, this type of engagement and ensuring that we are restoring and modernizing these spaces for Parliament and that parliamentarians feel that that is the case is critically important. And it's probably the best way to help ensure that these projects proceed in as best as possible manner. We also, from a PSPC perspective, from a public services procurement, we have to find a way, especially with a center block or a visitor welcome center, to get to consensus with both the House of Commons and the Senate of Canada. And that is an additional challenge for us to make sure that these projects are able to proceed, as well as they can, and respect timelines and budgets.
Sorry to interrupt, or not interrupt, but interject. But has the Senate? I mean, you've asked. We talked here about what the board expressing what the House's requirements are. Does the Senate's own committee, I forget the name of the committee, but it's a comparative committee to this one, do the same thing? And is there an aspect of the space we're talking about that relates to the needs of the Senate as opposed to the House, or is it more parliamentary and both together?
Sir, from my perspective, I would say that there's both. There are obviously, I would say, elements that are House-specific and Senate-specific. And then when you get to a facility like the Visitor Welcome Center, there are elements that you have to make sure are coordinated. When you talk about the visitor experience, or you talk about security, or you talk about some of the back-of-house services, then there are definitely synergies and benefits of doing that in a coordinated way. And at the end of the day, the Visitor Welcome Center and the center block is one facility, and we need to try and think of it as one facility with that accommodate different institutions.
Ms. Scroll and Ms. Block wish to intervene, and then I'll go to Ms. Bergen and then Mr. Strahl.
Well, I understand the rationale from departmental officials as to why it's important to move forward with the recommendations we have before you today. In order not to lose time and so on and so forth, and it leaves us post-election opportunities to reflect on ups and downs and so on. But certainly I would like to see clarification on the role and expectations of the three of us representing different parties are going forward. I don't want to receive a complicated document and ask for a decision in 48 hours and then come to you with a recommendation that we really haven't had a time to be fully engaged in. I love the suggestion, as Ms. Bergen said, these are the kinds of ideas that we thought we may be doing. Did not expect to, with limited amount of time, to be coming to you with recommendations to this extent. So I think we all understood why we needed to go forward today in a short period of time, but I certainly would appreciate some clarification of the role of the working group in the future and the expectations of us from the board.
Before I go to Ms. Block, I think it is that you're there on behalf of members to convey members' concerns and make sure that they're consulted and that you are the voice of members in that process. Ms. Block.
Thank you very much. I might go a step further than my colleague in terms of describing some of the angst that we probably felt in the last couple of meetings that we've had. I do at the front end want to say that, I have fully appreciated being brought in and being given the level of detail that we were. And I think there's a great group of people here working on this project. And so we've relied heavily on, like I said, their expertise as well as what's been done historically. I would suggest that, very respectfully suggest that if there is a standing committee that is made up of members from all parties that believe that perhaps they have a role to play in this process, a working group with 3 members representing all parties feels a little duplicative to me, to have us meeting with these folks to sort of get our initial responses to some of these things and then bring them back to you. So I'm questioning whether or not we've got a layer here that is perhaps not necessary if we've got a standing committee like PROC, and then of course the BOIE, who ultimately are going to be the ones making the decisions, which has great representation from every party on it already.
I'm not sure we do make the ultimate decision, except to say what we think that the requirements of the House of Commons are. I mean, PSPC has to make some, construction decisions and so forth. But by the way, what we're asked for today, what the presentation asks for, is approval of a size of a space to have walls around, basically, in which the work can carry on. And of course, that would allow for something within that space of various sizes later, right? That's all that you're talking about. I mean, but anyway, I've got Ms. Bergen, Mr. Strahl, and Mr. Julian.
A couple of things. So I think, Ms. Block, you're entirely right, and it was never intended in any way that it should be a duplicate body. But there was a sense that what PROC was looking at doing, and I think when that report is tabled, I don't know if it's public yet, but the report on what PROC would be doing, it would not fulfill that mechanism, more of a casual mechanism for our members to be able to communicate, just some simple things. So I agree with you, and we do not want a duplicate body as to what PROC is doing. So I think we're in full agreement, and now we just have to kind of fix that. But in respect to what Mr. Patrice was saying, that BOIE has made these decisions. I guess I know it was before I was here. I would like to know when that decision was made. For example, I'll use the example that the front lawn of Centre Block was going to be excavated in that whole plan. But then, and to what you're saying, Mr. Speaker, is who's making the decisions around how many committee rooms there are in a place, or what the layout's going to be, or we're not making those decisions. And so again, who makes those, and then we know who would be ultimately held accountable for them. Thanks.
I give you high level, and then maybe on the more specific in terms of the committee room and all of that. But for example, the visitor welcome center concept was approved by the BOI in 1999, and then again in 2006, and then 2009, and then 2011. And in terms of requirement, in terms of committee rooms and the such, it's made at the BOI, but there's a level of details and specificity, and will be in terms of, so, and I've not been here, but I can understand that you don't go through every plan, every floors, and every room. And sometimes it doesn't actually go into a level of detail that you actually have in terms of the committee room. Time to look at and assess. So that was kind of I saw the attempt of the working group to go into that, what I call the granularity of the project, and buildings of this magnitude and renovation of those size. So, and Susan may confirm, but over the years, over the last 20 years, all this decision in one shape or the other, and then it's a question of how much details did the previous board get, is the question. But Susan, if you...
Yeah, so things like numbers of committee rooms, all the basic requirements were set out in 1999 in a very concise report that was approved by the board, and that's kind of the base requirements that we've been striving to incorporate through the LTVP. And so, as Michelle mentioned, in 2006, some of the LTVP was evolved into site plans, so concept ideas, and then further to that, in 2009, 2011, there was a full review done by the administration and to make sure the requirements were still accurate, and that went to through, at the time, what the governance was. There was an LTVP steering committee at the senior management level within the administration, and then on forward through the BOI for approval. And so those are the requirements we've been working towards in the overall. But as Mr. Patrice says, we've never come to the board with a whole lot of granular detail, except on certain occasions, as example, the desks in the chamber. So that was one of the few times we actually brought something so detailed to the BOI, because we felt it was so important and had learned from the experience of the five-seaters that, that was something you wanted to be involved in. But on projects this size, there's a lot of detail, right? And so it's a matter of figuring out what detail you want to be involved in and what we can work with you to get feedback and input so that it becomes a better space and place for your work.
Mr. Straw.
Yeah, it's very difficult to 20 years ago when this was approved. I'm gonna guess I know one of the members that was on the BOE at that time, but of course it was all in camera, so we can't discuss any of that. But so, but I think, I have the benefit of sitting beside Mr. Julian here, and clearly this group has been given financials and the implication, that is not what the intention was here, to have people, you know, in the case of Ms. Block, a shadow minister, a key member of our shadow cabinet, who has, you know, she's a respected senior member of our caucus, so we put her in there. We didn't put her in there so that she would be making multi-million-dollar suggestions that would put her under an additional amount of pressure to, you know, feel that was part of her mandate suddenly. I think we wouldn't have wished that upon her. We would have chosen someone we liked much less than Mrs. Block if that was the case. I think, you know, I think on this one, I understand the need to, I think this probably should have come to the board directly. I don't think this probably should have been something that the working group was assigned to. I think it was probably, as we're working through this, we're going to find these things, but I don't expect that this is the role of this working group. That and the tough part is if the decisions were, you know, the ball is already, you know, they're already got the scaffolding up on the building. It's not like we're going to have much input at this time. However, those of us that sit on this body are ultimately seen to be accountable, regardless of whether or not the decisions were made by relatives of ours or not in the past. But anyways, so I think we can, this is the last meeting that we have. Obviously, this isn't going to be something they're going to be seized with over the summer, so we can revisit it again. I think we don't have a problem talking about, yeah, you need to start digging. If that's what the decision was, yes, you do. You need to start.
No, can they put this wall up, I think, that is this size? And well, Mr. Julian has a different view on this, and I'm going to go to him next after Mr.
So
Stroh.
that's my, you know, if it is necessary for the project to, regardless, to dig 10,000 square meters in front of the center block, we're not engineers, we're not architects, that we're well down the path here. That is not the decision that we need to make. That needs to happen. We can decide in the future if they need to come to us for a decision on whether it needs to be 27,000 square meters or 10, like that. That's fine, but I don't know why we're even talking about, if you need to put the conduit, you know, if you need to put the services in there for 10,000 square meters, I don't know why it's coming back to us, I guess is what I'm saying. That needs to happen.
As I go to Mr. Sorry.
You know, go for it in that regard, but I don't know why we need to even talk about the other phases at this point. But
as I go to Mr. Julian, I would ask us to keep in mind that how spread out we are now in terms of the footprint of the precinct, and maybe in due course we can have a comment about whether part of this is intended to either limit that in the future or to bring it back a bit, which helps in a number of ways with efficiency, security, etc. Mr. Julian.
I have a question that I should have asked in the working group, and I'll ask now. Is the boy being consulted, or does the boy have responsibility for approval? In other words, if we decided right now that we decline the contract for excavation, what happens? Yeah. Have we made a decision, or is that just something that then is taken into consideration in terms of moving forward?
I think that's a very challenging question, as we've discussed at this committee. This concept, these projects have been previously approved. The government entered into these contracts on the explicit understanding that Parliament wanted a visitor welcome center, and Parliament requested the Government of Canada, Public Services and Procurement Canada specifically, to implement such a project. So that's on the basis to this point upon which contracts have been entered into. So if the decision is to no longer proceed, yes, there are contract implications. There's no question about that. There's a Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada. Under her authorities, those contracts have been entered into, and we would have to have some deep discussions between Parliament and the legislative and executive branch, how best to manage that situation.
So that decision of boy would be determinate. That would be determinant. If we And I
if-
support
if-
the excavating contract, but if we said no, that would be a decision that would then be implemented.
Now, I'm only speaking from a personal perspective at this point, which can be dangerous. But if Parliament explicitly does not want a visitor welcome center, I could not see proceeding to build a visitor welcome
Okay,
center.
thank you. So no, I understand, but that we're being seen as a decision-making body. I think that's important. Ms. Bergen asked a very valid question, and I hadn't actually asked it in the working group. I had assumed that we had decision-making authority, and it appears to be the case. So then coming back to the visitor center, that is something that needs to be decided by a future boy. I think all three of us on the working group agree that this is not a decision that should be taken now. And I do not believe that we're tied by decisions that were taken 20 years ago. The context was different. The mechanical demands were different. I believe that on this project, we're proceeding step by step, but ultimately, as the boy or the new boy after the election, will have responsibility to deciding what the ultimate configuration is. The excavating contract, the scalability is important because it doesn't tie us in to that decision about whether or not to proceed with the visitor center. What it does is allows the work to begin, so we're not delaying this project unduly. But ultimately, it will still come back, and there needs to be some hard discussions and hard decisions taken after the election about what center block and the renewal project will look like ultimately. And I think that's important for us to take note and to build time into for November, December.
Mr. Strahl?
Yeah, I do believe that at some point I did ask for kind of a briefing on what the org chart, what the flow, that surely must exist somewhere, that the decision-making process, what that looks like. And if we've just layered on a working group on top of that, we should be able to see that as well. But I think that is, we saw even in the assignment of offices in this building, the difficulty of relying on decisions that were taken 20 years ago. So I agree with Mr. Julian there that, we're the people here now that are responsible for approving or not certain funds. So I think we want to be involved where we need to be and not slow things up unnecessarily. But I believe I did request at a previous meeting, I don't have the blues in front of me, but I was looking for some indication of how this is supposed to work going forward. So I think we've kind of had to jump into it apparently to build the fence and to start the excavating contract. That's fine. We're about to rise at the end of next week, so I doubt that this group will have to make any other decisions like this. So we still have time to get this right, but I think that starts back a few steps, I would suggest, and I certainly appreciate the work that the working group has done, and apologize for putting you in that stressful position in advance of this meeting. But I think if we want to get it right, we have to go back to that. What is the decision-making flow chart, and then we can look at where we believe a working group or members of Parliament should insert themselves and where they are not to be inserted, and that will give us a lot better idea, rather than just kind of coming to and from this group and presenting. We need to kind of know where we want to be, where we want to insert ourselves, perhaps. So I would ask for that again.
I think that you put it well by saying where we wish to insert ourselves, right? But I have Ms. Bloch and then Mr. Patrice. And, we don't have any time. I think we better go. I think we better suspend. Sorry, you'll come back, please. We'll be. Okay.
Great.
Ms. Bloch, 30 seconds.
Just building on the comments that were made, I think one of the things that really was an impetus for us is understanding that there is a cost to delaying as well. If we don't stick with the deadlines that we've agreed to. So that was also one of the reasons why we understood it was important to come back now.
We will all reflect on those wise words over the next 10 minutes or so, and then we'll come back. I think, or can we? We can't come back today?
Yes, well, we have.
We have to finish?
1:30. We have until.
We have until 1:30, I understand. Okay, okay, suspended. excavation contract strategy and the construction hoarding. Agreed? Agreed. Now, Monsieur Patrice has indicated that he will provide members of the board in the next week or so with a note on the governance of this process.
And also a detailed briefing, but
And I think that, from here on, it is important that we decide when we want to insert ourselves, or the board in the future decide that, whoever they may be. Colleagues, I thank you very much. I know you have lots to do, so I think we better, or do we want to go on with the next? Sorry, we have another item, I guess. Sorry, but
We do. Can I just
Ms.
add
Bergen.
one? Yeah, before you go, I just want to make sure we're clear now, though, as Mark requested, that we can have sort of a flow chart, or we can get that so that we understand who's making those granular decisions, and then we know, as we said, where we are going to insert ourselves.
yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
before we adjourn, sorry, we have number 8, video broadcasting and webcasting for committees. Judy, would you go ahead, please?
Chair,
Gonna approve those
So I
both
want you to know that we appreciate the board agreeing to include our recommendation for additional broadcasting resources and options for committees in the next parliament as part of your agenda today. I'm joined by Eric Jens, Stephen Obey, and Ian McDonald from House Administration. As many of you have known, there has been growing challenges around access to the limited resources to video broadcast committee proceedings. Many committee chairs and members feel that this creates conditions where committees do not always get the attention they would like for their important work that they do on behalf of Canadians. In addition, if additional video streams for committee meetings were added, closed captioning would be included, increasing access to committee proceedings for even more Canadians. So as there have not been changes to the existing broadcasting resources since 2001, so I think it's probably time. As a result, the Liaison Committee recently saw a presentation on web broadcasting option for committee meetings, and the committee fully supported this initiative as a way of increasing access. Am I going too fast for you, Ian? Access to video broadcast.
Scroll, but I think what we need to come to quickly is the fact that you've made recommendations are at the end
Yes.
of the note that the Speaker write to the House leaders to recommend they seek the approval of the House to expand the number of committee meetings may video broadcast, webcast simultaneously. 2, approve additional resources as outlined in the consideration section under A, financial implications, and we all have that. And 3, the temporary funding be absorbed through any surpluses from the global envelope for standing committees available at the end of the fiscal year 2019-20. Is the board ready to say yes to that? Mr. Strahl?
So this obviously would have no impact in this parliament. And I think what we are comfortable with, especially at this stage, is to approve the webcasting part of it right away. I think we would look at the broadcast, an additional broadcast capability, perhaps with the new board. So I don't know if that is possible or what the difference is, but that is what, when we were looking at it, we were comfortable certainly that everything be broadcast to the web, but that we weren't prepared at this time to sign off on the additional
Okay.
television.
That's an option we could do. Has everyone else agreed to that, or are there other comments? No other comments, then are we agreed to that proposal from Mr. Strahl?
Agreed.
Very good. We're now, thank you very much. Sorry to cut you short, but we don't have any time. We're now on to the 4 reports that are numbers 9, 10, 11, and 12 on the agenda. Are there any issues arising? Yes, Mr. Julian.
Yeah, so I think we could read all 4 together.
Good.
And the question that I have reading through the reports was on the report on preventing and addressing harassment. Sorry, preventing and addressing harassment. There was a question about the reporting in Table 1. Sexual harassment, there were 4 inquiries and no complaints lodged. And I just wanted a response to that. It seemed to me strange that something as serious as sexual harassment, there were inquiries, and yet there were no complaints levy. That it raises some concerns for me, certainly, that we may have victims of sexual harassment that are not stepping forward for whatever reason. But it could just be that the accounting sexual harassment inquiry could have come from the members themselves, just making sure that they understood what their responsibilities were. So without context, that figure of 4 inquiries, no complaints, seems concerning, but I was hoping there was some answers to that.
Dag.
Thanks, Mr. Julian. Just to give some context, so when inquiries come in, they can be from the member themselves, just talking about the policy framework. It can be from employees. It could also be the MP inquiring because they may have a situation between employees. And there are a lot of informal mechanisms to help resolve some of these issues without a more formal complaint occurring. So it doesn't mean that necessarily that the situation hasn't been dealt with. It just means it may have been resolved otherwise, or it may have just literally been 4 inquiries on the policy framework if an MP wants to understand what his obligations are under the policy as well.
Do we track that, and do we know what happened to those 4 inquiries?
They were resolved. So whether it was an inquiry just on the policy framework, there wasn't any formal complaint that came out of those.
Are the 4 reports approved, accepted, adopted? What's the word we're looking for? Adopted? Adopted. Adopted, and I will table the ones mentioned, number 9 and number 12. Okay? Thank you very much, members, for all your hard work on the board. Have a good summer and good luck. Meeting adjourned.